The first $50,000 feels impossible. You cut expenses, you say no to things, you try to be disciplined, and slowly, painfully, you get there. But then something strange happens. The next $50,000 doesn't feel easier. It feels almost the same. You're still saving, you're still investing, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. And yet, your net worth graph doesn't explode. It barely moves. On paper, you're making progress. In reality, it feels like you're stuck. And this is where a lot of people start questioning everything. Am I doing this wrong? Is investing even worth it? Why does it still feel so slow? Here's the part nobody explains. This isn't a motivation problem. It's not a discipline problem. And it's definitely not just you. There's a phase in building wealth where effort stays high, but visible results stay low. A phase where progress is real, but almost invisible. And most people hit it and never realize what's actually happening. So what is this invisible ceiling? And why do so many people get stuck right here? Today, I'm going to show you exactly what this phase is and why it happens to almost everyone who tries to build wealth. It's called the Wealth Plateau. And by the end of this video, you'll understand the math behind why your progress feels so slow, the psychological trap that causes most people to quit right here, and the specific shift that actually breaks you out of it. We'll break down what's really going on beneath the surface, not just in your investments, but in how your income, contributions, and time interact. Because once you see this clearly, something changes. You stop second-guessing yourself, and you start making decisions that actually move you forward. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, but not getting anywhere, this will show you exactly where you are and what to do next. My name is John, and I spend way too much time thinking about how people build wealth and why it feels so slow in the beginning. If you're someone who's saving, investing, and trying to make progress, but feels like nothing is really changing, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now let's break down what this plateau actually is, because once you see it clearly, the frustration starts to make a lot more sense. So what is the wealth plateau, really? It's a phase where your effort is high, but your visible results are low. And that mismatch is what makes it feel so frustrating. Here's the thing. In the early stage of building wealth, almost all of the progress is coming from you, not from your money. You're the one earning, saving, deciding, and consistently putting money aside. Your investments are there, but they're not doing much yet. So even if you're doing everything right, your net worth moves slowly. You might go from $10,000 to $18,000, then to $26,000, then to $34,000. That's real progress, but it doesn't feel like progress because the effort it takes to get there is significant. You're saying no to things, you're thinking about money more carefully, you're trying to be consistent, and the result doesn't match how much effort it feels like you're putting in. That's the plateau. It's not that you're stuck. It's that your inputs and your visible outputs don't feel aligned yet. And this is where it gets really interesting, because most people assume something is wrong at this stage. They think they need a better investment, a higher return, or some kind of shortcut to speed things up. But the plateau isn't a mistake in your strategy. It's a built-in phase of how wealth actually works. In the beginning, progress is driven by contributions, and contributions grow in straight lines, slowly, predictably, without any dramatic jumps. Meanwhile, compounding, the thing everyone talks about, is still too small to matter. So what you're experiencing is a completely normal phase where your system is working, but it hasn't reached escape velocity yet. And this is the part nobody talks about, because from the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. But underneath, something is quietly building, just not in a way you can easily see yet. So let's look at the math, because this is where the plateau stops feeling random and starts making sense. Imagine you're investing $500 a month, consistently, no breaks, at an average return of about 8% per year. After the first year, you've put in $6,000. Your total might be around $6,400. That extra $400, that's your investment return. Not bad, but not life-changing. Now go out 3 years. You've contributed $18,000. Your total might be around $20,000. So after 3 years of discipline, consistency, and saying no to things, your investments have added about $2,000. And this is where it gets really interesting, because look at what's actually driving your progress. It's not the market. It's not compounding. It's you. You're putting in $500 every month. You're the engine moving this forward. Your investments are just assisting a little. Now go out 5 years. You've contributed $30,000. Your total might be around $36,000. So compounding has added roughly $6,000 over 5 years. Again, real progress, but still not dramatic. And this is the part nobody talks about. Compounding is not linear, but it feels invisible in the beginning because it scales with size. When your portfolio is small, even a strong return doesn't produce a big dollar impact. 8% on $5,000 is $400. 8% on $50,000 is $4,000. Same rate, completely different outcome. So in the early stage, your money simply isn't large enough yet to create noticeable acceleration. Here's a simple way to think about it. It's like pushing a heavy flywheel. At first, you're putting in a lot of effort, and it barely moves. Every push feels the same. There's no visible momentum. But what you don't see is that each push is building energy, and eventually, that wheel starts to move on its own. That's exactly how wealth works. Right now, during the plateau, you are doing almost all of the work. Your contributions are responsible for the majority of your growth. Your money hasn't taken over yet, and this is where people get this wrong. They expect compounding to feel powerful from the beginning, but mathematically, it can't. It needs time, and more importantly, it needs scale. Until then, progress will look slow, even when everything is working exactly as it should. So if the math is working, why does this phase feel so bad? Because psychologically, the wealth plateau is almost perfectly designed to make you lose motivation. You're putting in real effort. You're being disciplined. You're making trade-offs every single month. But the feedback you get is weak. Your account goes up, but not in a way that feels meaningful. And that creates a disconnect, because as humans, we expect effort to produce visible results quickly. If you go to the gym, you expect to see progress. If you work more hours, you expect to earn more money. But here, you're doing the right things, and the reward feels delayed. This is the part nobody talks about. The plateau doesn't just test your strategy, it tests your patience. And when there's no strong feedback loop, motivation starts to drop. You check your account less often. You start questioning whether it's worth it. You become more flexible with your rules. Maybe you skip a contribution. Maybe you spend a little more than usual. Maybe you stop tracking things as closely, not because you don't care, but because it doesn't feel like it's working. And then there's the comparison problem. You look around and it seems like other people are moving faster. Someone bought a house. Someone else is making more money. Someone is talking about big investment gains. And it creates this subtle pressure. Why does it feel like I'm behind? But what you're seeing is usually the result, not the phase they went through to get there. And this is where people get this wrong. Most people don't quit investing entirely. They quit being consistent. They loosen the system just enough that it stops compounding properly. And the plateau, instead of being temporary, becomes permanent. Not because the strategy failed, but because the consistency did. So if the math is working, and the psychology is understood, why do so many people stay stuck here for years? Here's what most people don't realize. The plateau isn't really about your investments. It's about your inputs. Because at this stage, your wealth is being driven primarily by how much money you can actually put in, not how well that money performs. And that's where the real constraint shows up. Your saving rate is limited by your income. If you're earning $60,000 a year, there's only so much you can realistically invest each month. Even if you're being disciplined, you can optimize expenses, cut subscriptions, be more intentional, but there's a ceiling to how far that can go. And over time, something else happens. As income increases, expenses tend to follow. You get a raise, and your lifestyle adjusts. Maybe slightly better housing, a newer car, more flexibility in spending. Nothing extreme, just small upgrades that feel reasonable. But those small upgrades quietly absorb the increase, so your contribution rate doesn't meaningfully change. And this is where people get this wrong. They assume they need a better investment strategy, higher returns, better timing, smarter picks. But if your monthly contribution stays roughly the same, your trajectory stays roughly the same. You're trying to accelerate without increasing the force behind the system. That's why the plateau persists. Not because your investments aren't working, but because the input feeding them hasn't changed. And this is the part nobody talks about. You can't optimize your way out of a low-input system. You can tweak around the edges. You can make things slightly more efficient. But real change, the kind that actually breaks the plateau, comes from increasing what you're putting into the system in the first place. Because at this stage, scale matters more than precision. And until that changes, the plateau doesn't go away. Let's look at what happens if you stay here. Same income, same contribution, same system. You keep investing $500 a month. You stay disciplined. You don't quit, which is already better than most people. Over the next 10 years, you contribute another $60,000. Your portfolio grows. It compounds. And maybe you end up somewhere around $110,000 to $120,000 total. That's solid progress, but it still feels slow because even after a decade, the majority of that growth is still coming from what you put in, not from your money working for you in a meaningful way. Now watch what happens when one variable changes. Instead of $500 a month, you increase it to $800. Not overnight. Maybe it takes a couple years, a raise, a better job, a side income, but eventually your contribution goes up. Now over that same 10-year period, you're putting in closer to $96,000 instead of $60,000. And this is where it gets really interesting. That higher input doesn't just increase your balance, it accelerates when compounding starts to matter, because now your base is larger, earlier. So instead of ending up around $110,000, you might be closer to $150,000 or more, without changing the return, without picking better investments, without timing the market, just by increasing the input. And this is the shift most people miss. The plateau isn't something you wait your way out of. It's something you scale your way out of. Because at this stage, wealth is not limited by patience. It's limited by leverage. So what does actually breaking through the plateau look like? Because this is where expectations and reality don't match. Most people imagine this big, obvious turning point. Like one day, everything suddenly takes off. But that's not how it feels. At first, nothing seems different. You're still investing, still being consistent, still following the same routine you've been following this whole time. And for a while, it almost feels like more of the same. But then something subtle starts to change. This is where it gets really interesting. You check your account, and the increase isn't just coming from what you added that month. There's movement that you didn't directly create. Not huge, not dramatic, but noticeable. And over time, that starts to compound into something you can actually feel. Instead of needing a full year to see meaningful progress, you start seeing it in shorter windows. A few months make a difference. Then a single quarter makes a difference. And eventually, your money starts contributing in a way that feels real. Not theoretical, real. And this is the shift most people miss. The breakthrough doesn't feel like a sudden explosion. It feels like the system finally starting to work with you instead of depending entirely on you. Your effort is still there, but now it's being amplified. And once that happens, the entire experience changes. Progress feels less forced. Consistency feels more rewarding. And the same actions that once felt slow start producing visible results. Not because you changed everything, but because you stayed consistent long enough to reach the point where it finally shows. So how do you actually break through the wealth plateau? Let's make this practical, because this is where most people either stay stuck or finally move forward. 1. Calculate your plateau zone. First, you need to understand where you are. Look at two numbers: your current net worth, your monthly contribution. If you're investing $500 a month and your net worth is under, say, $50,000 to $70,000, you're likely still in the plateau phase. Why this matters is simple. At this level, your growth is still mostly driven by what you put in, not by what your money is doing. So instead of expecting acceleration, you recognize, I'm still in the build phase. And that removes a lot of unnecessary frustration. 2. Increase your contribution rate, not just your returns. This is the highest impact move you can make. Instead of asking, how do I get 10% instead of 8%? Ask, how do I go from investing 10% of my income to 15% or 20%? Because here's the reality. A higher contribution rate will move you forward faster than slightly higher returns, especially at this stage. Even an extra $200 to $300 a month changes your trajectory more than trying to outsmart the market. 3. Create an income expansion plan. This is where the real breakthrough happens, because your contribution rate is tied to your income. So if income doesn't change, neither does your ceiling. That means you need a plan, not just hope. It could be building a higher income skill, switching roles or industries, adding a side income stream. Now you might be thinking, I'll just focus on investing better. But this is where people get this wrong. At this stage, income growth has a much bigger impact than investment optimization because it directly increases the fuel going into the system. 4. Automate consistency. The plateau becomes dangerous when decisions become optional. So remove the decision. Set up automatic investing. Same amount, same time, every month. Because consistency is what allows compounding to eventually show up. Not intensity, not timing, just repetition. This protects you from the psychological drop-off that happens when progress feels slow. 5. Track the right metric. This changes everything. Stop focusing on daily market movements. Instead, track total contributions over time, net worth trajectory over time. Because during the plateau, those are the signals that matter. Your goal isn't short-term growth. It's building the base that will eventually create acceleration. And this is the shift. You stop trying to escape the plateau quickly, and you start building the conditions that make it impossible to stay there. So if you zoom out for a second, the wealth plateau isn't the part of the journey where nothing is happening. It's the part where everything is being built. Before the breakthrough, it feels like effort without momentum. You're thinking about money more than you'd like. You're being intentional. You're trying to stay consistent, but the results don't reflect it yet. After the breakthrough, something shifts. Not overnight, not dramatically, but noticeably. Your contributions are still there, but now your money starts contributing too. The growth becomes easier to see. Progress feels less forced, and more importantly, you gain optionality. You're no longer just reacting to expenses or relying entirely on your paycheck. You have a base, a system, a level of financial stability that gives you choices. Not luxury, just space. The ability to make decisions without everything depending on the next paycheck. And that's really the goal here. Not to rush the process, but to understand where you are in it and make the right moves at the right time. So if you want to get a clearer picture of where you stand, comment your current savings number, and I'll help you estimate your plateau phase. My name is John, and I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for educational purposes only. Always do your own research and make financial decisions based on your individual situation.